Hello and welcome to yet another tech distraction. This time I've got something a little different in store. I'll be looking at an Australian newspaper supplement called The Green Guide. It accompanied Thursday's edition of The Age newspaper, one of our major ones. For decades this was a staple for many of us who wanted to know what was coming on in electronics and tech, but also what was on TV, radio and the cinema screen. As a kid, I'd always nick the Green Guide before my parents could get to it, and I'd run off studying any computer-related articles or advertisements. I didn't care so much for the TV and radio stuff. Looking back now with the digital archives, it's nostalgic to take a look at a snapshot in time to see what was selling and what people were reading about. I find this really useful for some of my projects, and you've probably seen me do a few little clippings and so forth as we've gone along. I've chosen to start with June 1985, as from a PC retro perspective, we just started to see computer stores and advertisements in the newspaper here in Australia, and I thought it'd be cool to have a look at a couple of really early examples. I'll be going through and calling out some of the ads and articles that pique my interest as I go along. If I feel motivated enough, I might do a few more, a bit of a scope tech time travel, see how it pans out. Anyway, let's give it a shot. So in Australia, obviously we had a lot of free-to-air TV during the 1980s, and as a result you'll see a lot of references to free-to-air television as opposed to your subscription or paid services, which came a lot later. And this one even refers to Ansett Airlines commercial character costing $50,000. So Ansett was an Australian airline in the 80s, 90s and, well, I guess the very early 2000s, but didn't last much past that. Not much computer related on this page. We've got a few electronics pieces, and you'll see this throughout these early 80s newspapers. A lot of it is focused on TV and appliances and the electronics side of things. The computers are a little bit light on to start with. We'll take a look anyway. So on to page 2. I'll just sort of flick through these pages. I'm not going to go through these articles unless I think they're of interest to computer related pieces. There's obviously a lot of nostalgia here for Australians who may know some of this stuff, particularly if you're a TV person. A lot of this words and shows and people and names will really stand out to a lot of people. To me, I probably don't have the same nostalgia. I wasn't really a TV person, so you won't hear me talk too much about it unless I find something overly interesting. On this page, again, not much in the way of computer stuff here. Again, this is just a bit of a snapshot of history, but here we see our first computer ads. So I'll zoom into a couple of these. At the time, obviously, Apple was starting to kick off, so there was a few of these type of ads. It wasn't a lot in regards to prices because Apple didn't have a huge distribution, particularly here in Australia. But those that did want to buy it certainly find a dealer that was willing to sell them. Moving over to the IBM compatible side of things, we can see here that we've got a seller Chendai, but as you can see here, there's I would assume this is an IBM XT, given that they're talking about 8 expansion slots, 256K of RAM, dual Chinon drives. So Chinon was a famous, I guess, clone of the IBM drives, and these would more than likely be 360K, so they wouldn't have sold, I think, with anything smaller than that at this time. Could be wrong, but I think by 1985 most of them were 360K, and you can see here 1820 Australian dollars. As I go along, if I think that there's interest with the pricing and the inflation and so forth, I'll add it to the screen as a title afterwards. I do note this seller sells that same unit, I guess, with half the RAM and probably without the real-time clock and maybe some other bits and pieces for slightly cheaper. And then you'll see here there's one that actually comes with a hard drive, a 10 megabyte hard drive for almost 3,000 Australian dollars, which is gigantic. But again, 10 meg was pretty big back in those days, given your floppy drive was 360K and your system was somewhere between 128 and say 256 for the most part. You'll note also that these guys refer to monographic boards. Hercules was something that came out which allowed you to use monochrome graphics instead of just the plain text that you got with a standard monochrome display. And then we see here color bow, I guess they meant to say board. A CGA, presumably a CGA board would be about 220. And then there's a bit of an error here. I believe this is a 384K multifunction board, so some people might know this as a 5-in-1 or a 5-pack or something like that, which has usually got the ability to have memory expansion for your XT, also things like your clock and your I/O and maybe even a hard drive controller if you're lucky, something like that. So this is a National P1091 printer, and they talk about having it at 120 CPS and NLQ. These are acronyms that we probably wouldn't see on printers today. This means that the printer could do 120 characters per second, and NLQ means that the print that came out could be done at near letter quality. And here's that 10 meg hard drive by itself, and they mention it comes with a controller. And 1390, that's pretty steep, but again, if you needed it, you'd get it. You can see to the left, just scrolling over here, the APC3 from NEC. So this was another XT, and I think they also made AT versions of this APC. Maybe the APC4 might have been the the 286. Standard floppy and a hard drive here. So again, no prices here. It is interesting that they're sort of advertising, they're talking about save 18% on an investment allowance. So I see that term come up a lot. But moving over to this one on the right here, we've got Ultra Phase Commodore PC. I nearly said 64, but just Commodore PC company. Not all these companies actually sold the entire Commodore range. Some of them really thought the Commodore was going to dominate the PC, and you can see here with some of these sort of exaggerated claims, but runs the world's most popular business software. So that's curious. But also talking about the MS-DOS operating system and backed by the world's #1 name in microcomputers. So they're sort of thinking that Commodore PC was maybe the #1 brand, 1985, maybe. They were definitely kicking around, but don't know about #1. Oh, by the way, just while I was at it, I did find these ads as well. So we see these ones pop up a bit. So there was a lot of software sales around, and obviously we didn't have the likes of Steam or Microsoft Store or Apple Store or things like that online. A lot of these vendors were selling software in full boxes, or you could just go to a place and get them to sell you a copy, sometimes even without all the bits and pieces, but usually it did come with all the bits and pieces, and here's no exception. You can see that Logo, for example, which was a popular programming and teaching tool for young kids, came with a manual. Again, I'm probably not that interested in the price of the software side of things. What I did find interesting was actually the media prices. So you can see here, we've got single-sided double density and double-sided double density discs. So that would have meant 180K or something like that, 360K. And that was sold in boxes of, I believe there was usually about 10 in each pack. So you'd see there that looking at your prices for those, obviously everyone was stacking floppy disks back in the day, and anyone who had a PC from the early 80s usually had a large array of floppy disks. 4164 RAM, so what that was, on your IBM XT and PC era, there was this DIP-based RAM that you'd sort of put onto your motherboard into little sockets, and you could usually deck out a motherboard to up to 640K of RAM. So moving over to the next page, yeah, again, a lot of TV bits here, more AV. We've even got radio albums chart, so for those that are interested in music side of things, you can see what was selling in Australia at that time, and actually Eon FM was probably one of the first, if not the first. I'll have to check that up. FM station that was actually deployed in Victoria, may have even been in Australia. I remember their ads anyway as a kid, so I'm sure that there was something there. And you can see here too that Box Hill College has got some computer short courses. So this was something that was coming in. They were really trying to get people to study up and get used to this new wave of PC and software that was coming through. I think this is one of those full page ads from Encel. Encel is a very long-running AV supplier, pretty well regarded, at least in Victoria. And when I'm speaking about most of the stuff, I am talking about Victoria. Sometimes it will be relevant to Australia as a whole, but Victoria had a fair bit of this stuff, and a lot of these brands are sort of stuck to Victorian market, but we did have some obviously in New South Wales and Sydney. Sydney would have been booming as well with this. I'm sure there was a version of this in Sydney as well. But as you can see here, we got lots of camera stuff. So for those that are interested in cameras, you can see that SLRs were starting to come in here, being sold. But yeah, from a computer perspective, obviously we've got the Commodore 64 floppy drive here, this SKI, I'm not sure how you say it, Sky 64. So they're talking about how they've tested 2,000 programs with it, and it comes with 2 free floppy disks for $349. And again, we've got another one of these Apple ads here, and someone offering to do a film to video transfer for you, which is funny because these days we're probably used to seeing video to digital transfer, so it's funny seeing it from the other way around. This particular Choice Computer Center was obviously selling the Mac stuff, but they were talking about the 2E and 2C, which were very popular. It's interesting though because they've spelt Macintosh wrong. Bit curious. Yeah, probably wasn't a lot of quality control done in these ads back in the day. Some more AV equipment. People talking about compact discs. Interesting. Still would have been pretty new back then. People buying records, hi-fi shows, music, yeah, so it was still really, really pumping back then. Talking about Denon having a CD option on their stereo, which is, again, pretty curious. It would have been very expensive. You can see some of the prices for this hi-fi equipment would have been pretty pricey for CD and digital stuff back in the day. Again, we've got another person selling these floppy disks here, so Logical Connections are selling single-sided double densities, double-sided double densities. $28 a box of 10, so there you go, it's about right. They're talking about selling some Apple disk drives and WordStar and Lotus software. These guys are saying it's your last chance to save before June 30. Well, given this newspaper was put out on the 27th, you'd be right on it. You only really had the weekend to get there. Again, we've got this 18% investment allowance, so yeah, curious to know if anyone actually knows what that was about. It's SX64 Color Portable. Well, for those that know, that's a very sought after unit these days. And then again, we've got our stereos in Marantz, Schneider, Kenwood. So, you know, these are all pretty standard stuff. I was just trying to see if I could spot a CD player on here. We've got cassettes. They've just got the units. Yeah, sure, we'll see them as we go along. Oh, this one sort of goes over the next page here as well. So you got your equalizers and speakers and things like that. Oh, there's your disc players. Yeah, so about 400. Yeah, $400. It's about right. And this one I thought was interesting. So Holmes Glen College of TAFE. So this is still around today, obviously. They had a bit of a sort of explain what some of these courses were. So it's actually interesting. They're talking about automation and things like that, programming side of things, building your own Motorola 6802 based system. Talking about CPM, all that sort of stuff, computer graphics, soldering. Probably still handle doing this course, I reckon. I'm pretty ordinary at soldering, so wonder if they still offer something like that. And you'll see there's a lot ABC and SBS. So these were government-funded TV stations that still exist today. They're still government-funded. Now this one caught my eye. I'll have to check this one up as well. So apparently they had a special feature going, basically July 25, so a month after this, talking about computers in the homes and schools. So I might have to check that one up as well. All right, we move on to our first full-page computer ad. So this is interesting. A company called Microbuff. So just to show that I'm not lying, that's what they're called. They've done some interesting graphics here. A bit of, I guess, vector art, I think you'd call it, for the lack of a better term. And although I'm laughing and making a little bit of fun, to be honest, it would have been pretty difficult to do graphics back in those days. So hats off to them for actually putting something together. But I guess I'm looking at it going, this doesn't look very professional. We've got PC Pro and El Cheapo as their two lines. Both are obviously XTs, different feature sets. They've sort of kept that 256k RAM between the both. I think that's actually interesting to mention because there were a lot of people still selling 128s, as we saw with a couple of the earlier ads. So 256k at least, you know, you had a bit more capacity for DOS and your word processing things, so you could probably do a little bit more. And they talk about includes a monitor, so I'm not sure if they're talking about color or monochrome. I don't know back then whether there was a huge difference in price. I'll have to see if there was some examples. Then they even sell an AT down here for $3,990. Yeah, that's huge. I'm assuming this would come with a bit more memory. They haven't actually said what the specs are. So again, these ads were done a bit differently. They're referring to it as a PC Pro, and it comes with a TTL mono monitor. So again, probably just more of an office use PC there by the look of it. But good to know they're selling, I guess, a few different ranges there. And that's really the first big ad that we've seen. So here we've got, for people that still know JB Hi-Fi, they're still kicking around today in Australia. Some of their early ads here, they were very much a bargain basement company back in the day with their AV stuff. Definitely where you'd go if you didn't mind dropping the quality a little bit on some stuff and getting a good price. Here's an article about Teletext with its various information services. Vitel was spruiking its system that could also use dial-up. That's pretty advanced for 1985. And then I guess we're down to the TV part of this. So the back half of the Green Guide usually has a lot of things about TV shows and what's going to be on the cinemas, what's on festival-wise or show-wise. And then we've got our TV guides. I think you could probably there'd probably be someone that's interested enough to go and do a thing just on TV guides back in the day. A lot of these shows would still be things people would be aware of. For me, I probably care who's playing in the footy. That's my thing, the Australian rules footy. You can see here that they used to put the highlights on. Didn't have a lot in the way of live sport back then, at least not a lot of live footy. We did have a lot of live cricket that was on, so you can see there England versus Australia direct telecast. You can even see there's even radio there. Last page here of just AV stuff again. There's your boom boxes or your portable systems as they'd call them. And that about wraps it up for this look at a snapshot in time, June 1985. The Green Guide was a staple for many of us who wanted to know what was coming out in electronics and tech, but also what was on TV and radio. I hope you found this interesting, and if I feel motivated enough, I might do a few more. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.